about you, Scott?
All right, thanks, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she had balls on
But that gets some.
Yeah, that gets a lot of sun.
But I would like to keep your girls because clearly, yeah, and she's supposed to wash that.
Well, true.
And I really don't want that down.
Well, it's all looking fine now. I mean, things up here. Council. Can we get no size? Yeah.
Before we get started, we do have a bit large number of people here than normal. If anybody wishes to speak on any particular item, you will be required to fill out a comment card and bring it up here before the meeting starts, so we do know that you desire to speak.
And the comment cards are in the back of the room.
How are you today?
I'm good. How about you?
Fine. I keep seeing your name on a lot of communities with some projects that people are saying good things, so it's good.
No, they don't know him.
What's,
They don't know him well.
all right, so that's the key right there.
Yeah. He gets to know better.
Mike? Paul? Any comments on the peanut gallery?
Hey, I hope I didn't talk that way. He's thinking he might get.
I don't know you guys well enough yet to know. Snap comments back from work.
Guess we do one.
He's on vacation. So he's not here, okay. Because he said that at the reception. Good to go. He's on.
And I know this ordinance a little bit better. I don't know what's going on here.
Call to order the July meeting of the Maumelle Planning Commission. Staff, do we have any announcements?
No announcements, Mr. Chair.
We'll move on to approval. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. You've all been provided a copy of last month's minutes in your packet. Does anybody have any corrections to be made to the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second?
A motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no. All right, the minutes are approved. I have no public comments on non-agenda items, so I will open the public hearing. We have no old business, so we'll move into new business. First item being the rezoning for the Stone Canyon Edition. Staff report, please.
Mr. Chair, this is property located at 23705 Highway 365. It's approximately 65 acres. Current zoning is R1. They proposed rezoning to R2. The proposed land use amendment is for, of course, the 65 plus or minus acres along Old Maumelle Road in response to the proposed rezoning of the property from R1 to R2. Staff initiated the land use amendment pursuant to section 54-78. Staff proposes an amendment to the master land use map from single-family detached to special use residential. As of the writing of this report, no comments had been received and all legal notifications had been made, and the guidelines for the decisions have been provided to the commission. As far as staff analysis, staff initiated the land use amendment per section 54-78A from single-family detached, as the applicant is seeking a multi-density development with a mix of single-family, two-family, and other residential housing types. SUR is a better fit than MFA due to the topography of the property and a proposed park space utilizing an existing quarry area on the west side of the property for recreational purposes. Per section 54-73B3, special use residential includes lands with unique characteristics like very steep topography or which provide sites for development of less conventional forms of housing. This category is intended to accommodate a variety of housing styles and densities. It may include retail, commercial activities geared towards the residential market. The owner of the property annexed into the city of Maumelle last year, anticipating such action would promote the sale of their land. They did not have intention to develop it, but to sell it. That is now happening, and the current applicant, is requesting the rezone, who's requesting the rezone is a potential purchaser. Changes in the area include development of Stonebrook subdivision on north side of Highway 365, which is spurring an increase in residential development on this side of Maumelle. Staff recommends a do pass recommendation to Maumelle City Council for the proposed amendment to the master zoning map. Of course, this item does require a waiver based on interpretation, and you'll find, let's see. Waiver analysis, applicant is new and not the same as the owner, proposing to be a new owner of property for development of a mixed density development. The current owner annexed into the city in the fall of 2021 with present zoning of R1 and land use of single family detached. The proposed developer has not had an opportunity to seek a rezoning due to the 12-month resubmittal ordinance and is time sensitive regarding the purchase of the property with the preferred zoning and land use per letter dated 7/21/2022 from the applicant's representative. And they've also requested that being consistent with actions from previous actions by the Planning Commission, in which a waiver was approved in August of 2021 with the Central Arkansas water property that was rezoned. That one also had a waiver that was approved due to a different developer applicant and a different zone that was being sought. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Gromer. I have one public comment form. Alderman Mosley.
Mr. Chair, should we not approve the waiver first before we begin entertaining the discussion regarding the master land use and the master zoning map?
I have one brief question, Alderman Mosley. Alderman Mosley, do you have any comments regarding the waiver?
Not to cut you off, Mr. Mosley.
That's fine.
Do you have comments regarding the waiver or the substance of the changes?
The waiver.
Thank you.
My
Name and address, please.
name is Steve Mosley. I live at 16 Riverwood Place. I'm the one of the Ward 1 council members. Yeah, I wanted to visit about this. I attended the subcommittee meeting, and there was much discussion as to whether the waiver could be done, and then the item B and C, go ahead and address those items if they could be addressed in the same meeting. And I think the city attorney read from the code book, and it said that a waiver would have to be, if I understood her correctly, a waiver would have to be granted before an application could even be received and considered by the planning department to come before the planning commission. If you all do go ahead and address those two second items, I think you're going to be in violation of the law unless the city attorney has changed her opinion on that. But I think she recommended that you wait, if you pass this waiver, that you wait until the next meeting before you consider these things. And I would appreciate if you would respect the city code. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. All right. Discussion on the sub-item A, the waiver.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Landis?
Regardless of how the vote comes out on the waiver, I would request staff and Corporation Council to review this and decide whether that language needs to be tightened up either with a text modification or a policy established, because it's very unclear what the word same means. Is it the same owner, the same applicant, the same request, the same piece of property? And I think that'll reduce problems in the future.
So I take it, Mr. Chair, because it still remains on the agenda, the opinion of our astute and esteemed council says that we can move forward with a motion and a discussion.
On the waiver?
No, for B and C.
I was not, I did not give that opinion. I also wanted to ask the question, and I apologize for just now noticing on the, you said the applicant, is the applicant a current owner of the land or a prospective purchaser?
Roy Andrews, 3 Monarch Drive. The applicant is not the owner of the land. The owner is still Ms. Bradley that brought the property when it was annexed. She still owns it. The applicant is a development company that's looking to purchase the property.
So my question is, under 94-9 on an application for amendment, it's to be initiated by the city council, the planning commission, the mayor, or the mayor's designee, or by one or more owners or lessees of land affected by a proposed amendment. So none of those parties has made application?
The owner has made the application to rezone it. That is correct. But just as the property was done before, they didn't own it at the time when they requested the waiver. There was another applicant coming in.
So I guess I'm confused. I just heard you say two
So,
different things. The
I was
owner
with-
is not the applicant.
Not tonight, no, it's not.
So,
I'm sorry, the owner tonight, yes, is the applicant. Ms. Bradley is the applicant for this property.
so Ms., in prior waivers that have come forth that we've seen, there are potential purchasers of property have gotten written authorization from the owners to seek the rezoning. That happened with O'Reilly, that happened with CAW, and that's happening here. There's a potential purchaser that is facilitating the rezoning, but they've gotten authorization from the owner to submit the application for review.
Okay, so on the application paperwork, the applicant is listed as whom?
So initially it was listed as Bradley, and then in discussions, trying to determine who the best applicant was, it was the one that was seeking to purchase the property was the applicant,
Ascent Development.
the development company, with the authorization, which in the code states you have to have authorization from the owner, if I'm correct.
Do we have a copy of the
Yeah,
application?
does the application paperwork reflect that the potential purchaser is the agent of Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
You have a letter from Ms. Bradley giving Ascent Development authorization.
Is that letter not provided in the packet?
No.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I didn't see it at the
My
agenda center
apology.
either.
Can you pull that up, Jason?
And that's fine. I just wanted to clear that up because I do want to make sure that we are receiving applications from the parties required by the code.
So the application states the owner name, and then, of course, the applicant is the applicant
Put that back up.
owner representative.
Do you want to see that, Mr. Mosley?
I'm just looking at this, is fine.
I did want to clarify that we did do some research also, and the last time we allowed, and the only time that I recall that we've ever allowed the waiver to run at the same time as the zoning request was back in help me, August 2020. It was the situation with the gas station that was not allowed in a C3, and we actually were considering a more restrictive zoning category than was currently in place because the applicant had misunderstood what was allowed in the zone he had requested.
And also in clarification, the CAW waiver, which was in August of 2021, the waiver went forward for discussion, and then they pulled the actual rezoning and land use to the next month, to be heard the next month, to be in compliance with the ordinance.
Mr. Chair, so Madam Attorney, can you please respond to Mr. Mosley's comment regarding your interpretation of whether we can actually hear items B and C regarding the application tonight for Stone Canyon?
I mean, his statement is correct in that my opinion hasn't changed, and that I don't believe we should allow the resubmission until after the waiver is approved.
So if the waiver is approved tonight, does that mean that the applicant needs to wait to the next application period, or then we can hear it tonight?
So it should not have been allowed to be resubmitted until the waiver was granted. So the process should not have started until the waiver was granted. So yes, he would, I mean, it's my opinion that it appropriately is done by considering the waiver either by the council or by the commission, and then technically it should be submitted after that, so it should be heard at the following meeting.
Would it help if we asked for a deferral on B and C till next month?
If that's what you so choose.
Well,
I can't make that decision for you.
This may be a follow-up question to the city attorney. So let's say we consider this waiver, and as we discussed in subcommittee, I'm still of the opinion, my interpretation of the code is that a waiver is not required here, because I'm not sure that this really meets the issue of a resubmission, which may be part of our discussion of the waiver itself. But let's say we deny the waiver, and then items B and C are on the agenda. If we reject those because they did not meet the waiver requirements and they submitted too early, does that count as a rejection that then starts their clock over at 12 months again from this month?
Because you denied the waiver?
If we deny the waiver, then we have items B and C on our agenda, so we have to do something with them, whether it is defer them or whether it is make a substantive decision. If we make a substantive decision that the rezoning is denied based on procedural grounds, i.e. they submitted too early, is that a rejection that starts their 12 months
I don't think
early?
you can do that, because if you deny the waiver, you can't consider them at all. You can table them.
It's not hearing.
Mr. Chairman, am I hearing you say that we just can't address items B and C? It isn't, and that they'll have to resubmit them after the waiver is considered, if it's granted. So if there's a favorable motion on the waiver, then they could resubmit, because the action on it, the verb is resubmission. It's not voting on it. And that would be easy, because then you could just vote on these in order. But so they would have to withdraw their applications and resubmit them if the waiver is granted?
The code, that is how I interpret the code. The resubmission of a zoning amendment application shouldn't be allowed within that 12 months. So unless there's a waiver. So once we have a waiver, they can resubmit.
Just to make sure I understand, is that you're, based upon the code interpretation, we cannot table, they must reapply, the applicant must reapply.
It's resubmission.
Which is different,
They should correct, they should resubmit.
a resubmit. Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I give just a brief
Absolutely.
background on this? And I want to clarify how this got on, and I apologize for the confusion on the agenda. When this came forth, there was conflict between whether or not the annexation that happened actually was an actual application. So this process, we have been discussing that and trying to determine it. The one thing that we don't want to do is deter people from wanting to annex into the city of Maumelle. One of the things that Jason and I are doing, we're looking at the code, and we're actually going to bring forth an amendment next month to help fix this problem that we have in the code. But for now,
What problem is that, Mr. Grummer?
it's just the issue of the conflict with annexed land and how that zoning is applied, and whether or not that constitutes an actual amendment, or if it restricts somebody to that 12-month period. Because like in Ms. Bradley's situation, she had no intention of developing the land. She didn't know what the zoning was, so we made the recommendation for the least impactful zone, which is R1. We don't have anything in the zoning code that says you automatically zone when you come into the city of Maumelle this specific zone. That's one thing that we're going to propose, is how that is worded in the code. The other thing is that when a proposed purchaser of new land that is newly annexed into the city wants to come in and they have a proposal for development, that's at the time in which we look at and discuss the land use and the zoning. And that's really what's happening here. And we don't want to, staff did not want to negatively impact the owner of this newly annexed land because of a process that, in our opinion, needs to be updated, which we are going to be working on for next month. So
But I think you also have to be cautious in that evaluation, because it's not always the case. When someone comes, they're the developer and they're the intent and they
Right.
want to zone.
Right.
Well, and in this case, she did request the commercial zoning
Yes,
for
she
a
did.
portion of what she annexed in, which indicates that it was an intentional decision of how to zone the property.
All right, further
When's the 12 months?
March? Is that right? September.
The last
Thank you.
council decision was September 21st of last
I'll
year.
go
If you
council.
consider the council,
Go by
the planning commission decision was the end of July from a year ago, when planning commission.
Well,
and-
it's the decision that
The
was the
council.
where it was decided.
Which we can only recommend.
So in that situation, we'd have to wait until September,
Yeah,
Unless we waive-
if the waiver's denied.
unless we waive tonight, then they can come back next month.
Yeah, I understand the quandary that the applicant's in, and you know, I'm trying to get hold of you today, Mr. Grummer, but I was unsuccessful in the schedule. But I see that, so it comes in, they zone it, but the intent is that it's the best applicable use. We do have a planning document. The best of it is Maumelle Forward, although that flies pretty high, in my opinion. But it did say, and I did read it today. I brought it up and I read it, and it does say residential use. Why that was commercial, I don't know. The Maumelle Forward does not show that commercial in that area, but nevertheless, it's done now, so.
Actually, the Maumelle Forward in the general vicinity shows a town center type, village center type
It's gonna be
area.
west.
So it does, which village center does allow for light commercial. And then it does
So I was
call
looking
for.
at the map incorrectly. It was a good bit west of the location, but that's neither here nor there.
Right.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Landis?
Yes. I'd like to find out from our legal counsel what disposition we should make of items B and C so they're not considered to get the time clock going again for resubmission.
So that they're not, what did you say, they're not, what disposition should we make so that they are not what?
So we don't restart the 12-month clock.
Oh, I think, I mean,
Is it appropriate for the applicant to withdraw B and C after our vote on the waiver?
I think that would be appropriate.
I think it would certainly be the cleanest way to do this.
think it's-
Otherwise, I would assume we would have to declare them moot or just not take any action on them based on procedural defect
And we cannot
Without-
table,
without
we cannot table it.
without considering the merits.
It
Well, if
doesn't
we
seem
ju-
like
if-
tabling is an option.
Well, if we just don't consider them, it'll roll over onto old business.
We should make a change of the agenda if that's the case.
But if they're withdrawn, we don't have any question about that.
Correct.
So I'm hoping the
I
applicant.
don't, why
has
could you
some-
not table it? Once it's
Well,
properly
because if you table it, the
resubmitted?
application stands.
I don't
And
think
he's
it
told
does.
us they have to reapply.
Could you not table the consideration pending resubmission?
It's not a resubmission, you don't have the applicant.
I think as
submitting
Commissioner
a new
Landis pointed
document.
out, this is a very vague piece of the city code. I think it's certainly safe to say we should not consider the merits of this based on the city attorney's interpretation of this, but as far as removing this on a procedural defect or, you know, tabling it pending a secondary submission, that may be appropriate, but we are in a bit of a gray area here where interpretations may vary.
Well, a little bit semantical, I would recommend that they withdraw. It's obviously
Oh,
their
that's
choice.
absolutely the cleanest way to do it.
We will
I
withdraw.
agree with that.
I think that's, so you can see that as well too.
All right.
But we can hear the waiver.
Let's substitute discussion on the waiver.
Do we need to act on the waiver now that it's withdrawn?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Andrews, let me see if I'm clear. You're going ahead and seeking the waiver regardless of whether or not
Yes,
B and C
that
are
is correct.
considered?
So he can reapply?
Yeah.
Yes, so we can apply.
Correct.
And
You shouldn't say
be- and
reapply.
be heard
Correct, very good.
So they can be heard in August rather than
Be
September?
heard next month.
Yeah,
instead of waiting
correct.
2 months.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, correct. So, certainly the most recent application of a waiver, I don't think is all that factually different than what we're proceeding with here. It's really just a change in the buyer's
It's
temperature.
the same, it's a different owner, different intent.
Correct.
It's the same. Nothing different.
So if we're shooting for consistency, I think approving the waiver would be appropriate.
You ready to entertain a motion, Mr. Chair?
I don't have to entertain one. You can make one anytime you want. Do you think we're talking too much? Make a motion.
Right. I think the applicant may be tired of standing, I'm not for sure. I think the writing's on the wall. Make a motion that we accept the waiver request for the hearing for the Stone Canyon addition rezoning.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, this is just as to granting the waiver. Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no. All right, waiver is granted. Mr. Andrews, we know your intent, but would you like to make
We
any
would-
comments on B and C?
We would like to withdraw B and C.
Thank you.
All right. There we go. We'll move on and, okay, well, I have a public comment form, and I do apologize, my form got smudged a little bit from a Miss Regina regarding the land sale rezone. That will be taken up substantively at another time, but as it is on the agenda and you are here today, you are free to make your comments if you would like. If you could, please state your name and address into the microphone, and then you have 3 minutes.
3.
That's our rules.
Now, from on our side of the track, we get 10. So, my name's Regina Beret. I'm at 1410 Oldsmont Mill Road, where you all are planning to come down on the opposite side there on Persimmon Lane. It's just a lot of questions and unknown variables that we're concerned about where we are. And like on the papers, like a why, what, when, and all of these questions that we still have not got solid answers to. Just want to know the process, the land that you're trying to annex and develop on the west side. How does it affect us? And also, this commercial siting that you all are talking about, it was brought up in a meeting before, but that was not in the area where we were. It was like down the road somewhat where they were talking about putting in some coffee shops or whatever. Also, what kind of housing is going to be there in that area? I know you said single-family homes. You all did mention that. We were concerned about low-income housing, like the one you all have here on Valencia. That's a concern of ours as well. We're just concerned about where we are now as far as our lifestyle of living in the country and not being too citizenized or whatever you want to call it. We like the way we live. We know there's progress we don't have a problem with that, but we just like to know what and when and how the progress is going to be taking place and how it affects us. Thank you.
Just a general comment on that, you know, we're really just dealing with the zoning at this stage, so as far as what's actually gonna go in there formally, that's really not before us at this time, but, if you make a call to the, Planning and Zoning Department, they will provide you with as much information as they have. Let's move on to item number 2, the Cypress Bend Revised Development Plan. Staff report, please.
Mr. Chair, the Cypress Bend, formerly the M, which is located at 9900 White Oak Crossing, an area of approximately 17 acres, and with building coverage of approximately 56%, and proposed lots of 143. This project, preliminary plat and development plan approval was approved in May 2019 for 206 lot single-family residential development, then approved in March of 2020 for a revision reducing the number of lots and approving Phase 1 preliminary plan and plat having 61 residential lots and 2 out parcel lots with Phase 2 to be approved later. The developer has completed all infrastructure improvements for Phase 1 and was seeking final plat approval, but indicated his intent to sell the entire development to a new builder and is seeking preliminary plan and plat approval for Phase 2 so it can be transferred upon completion. Section 94-441 defines the purpose of the planned unit development, which states this system is advantageous when the developer who plats the land and provides access and utilities is the same developer to actually construct the buildings and provide the amenities that make the overall project marketable. An additional advantage is that the approved PUD plan remains intact even if transfer and ownership occurs. The approved PUD plan represents a commitment by both the developer and the city. Since the developer stated he no longer intended to be the builder, and the new proposed builder is currently constructing housing in the area which did not fit the types previously represented by the developer, staff suggested a revised plan and plat be approved so as not to create confusion of the housing typologies if they did not match those previously approved by Planning Commission. And then staff also wished to clarify the types of homes and dwelling reduction size recommendations per section 94-163B so as not to create conflicts with previously approved plans. In addition, since the developer intends to sell Phase 2 upon completion of infrastructure, a phased preliminary was recommended so that the timing of the development could be established with staff review and approval of the finals. This would provide all the necessary entitlements so that this development would not need to come back to Planning Commission for approval. Staff recommends, staff comments have been received. Public comments have been received. Those were provided by email to staff over the last month, which showed, I believe, five were against just spoke in against the transfer of the development. Staff comments have been provided within the report. In addition, so section 94-163 concerning reduction of dwelling size, of course, this is just something that I wish to have considered only because there is state regulation that may not allow this to be applied based on current state changes in 2019. So the city attorney has provided that for your review. There's, so comment number 2, a general note should be added to the plat referring to the bill of assurance number filed for record and state the minimum square footage allowed for each phase based if the reductions are allowed. Section 94-163B4 Staff comment number 3, minimum square footage for Phase 1 should be no less than 1840 if an 8% reduction is allowed, or 1740 for a 13% reduction based on the calculations. Again, if you're discussing the development plan and square footages for the bill of assurance. Section 94-454, comment number 4, an updated bill of assurance is needed, which addresses the same concerning that. Number 5, landscaping plan approved by staff showing perimeter treatments with irrigation around detention pond area fronting White Oak Crossing is recommended and should be tied to the Phase 2 improvements. Treatments for lots C1 and C2 will be approved with those amended development plans as they come forward. Comment number 6, staff details for recreational facilities in open space should be provided with the plan and state on the development plan when the facilities will be installed. Staff comment number 7, an access easement and sidewalk should be provided across open space track B due to this block being over 900 feet long. Comment number 8, all corner lots widths should be evaluated and adjusted accordingly for section 70-135. Staff comment number 9, consideration should be given for open space track E to be labeled an access easement for future potential pedestrian pathway access to other developments. And that was just a consideration, something to think about. And then section 94-451, number 10, all necessary fees must be paid. That one is no longer valid. We determined that the fee that was calculated in the system was overcalculated, but they paid the correct fee, so all fees have been paid. There's no waiver request. One item that you'll note on the actual development plan and plat is it was originally designed as a enclave with a single entrance, which had an emergency entrance on the southwest corner. We made the recommendation that that be opened up since it's going to be public streets, allowing for a secondary access ingress to Kilm Drive. And Jason, do you have any other comments? So staff recommends a due pass recommendation to City Council for the phase preliminary development plan of Cypress Bend contingent on meeting all staff, city engineer, and planning commissioner comments.
When was the original development plan and plat filed?
The preliminary?
Or the preliminary or was this into a final plat?
Well, so there's no final plat that has been filed yet.
When was the preliminary plat and preliminary development plan initially done?
So that one was done in March, March of 2020. It was originally in May of 2019, but then it came back, that was approved, and it was approved with a revision in March of 2020.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So is the applicant requesting us to approve a further reduction to 1740 on the square footage? I didn't see it in his letter.
Well, so the original bill of assurance had a square footage of around 1,500 square feet. So when we looked at this, and originally when they came, the square footages were presented as a larger development. With all the housing development that's going around, and with the concerns of the adjacent neighborhood to the north, which is Natural Trail Estates, the bill of assurance for that is those are over 2,000 square feet, and there was concerns over having smaller homes in proximity, and that's where that ordinance comes into play. So they haven't really asked for any reductions. What staff is recommending is that there be a specific set number based on that ordinance of a reduction, minimum from the adjoining. So if you went from 2,000 square feet at the percentages that allow for the reduction, then you hit 1840 would be 8%, but then there's also that buffer, green space buffer, which is the drainage in front as well as the street, if you consider that, along with some other parameters, you can go up to 13%, which gets you down to 1740 square footage. It's all about the spacing between housing, the way the ordinance is read. But again, I think there's some, this is a PUD, it's not R1, the regulations are not in our ordinance as to we're implying that the square footages should be set by the bill of assurance and within this neighborhood, and that's the regulating thing that we go by, which is set and filed with the county. So the city won't have to regulate it. It'll be the neighborhood.
So is your comment a recommendation to the developer, or is it a requirement by code?
Well, again, this is a planned unit development. It's a recommendation to Planning Commission that it be considered to protect the adjacent properties in natural trail estates from houses that are of a smaller typology that they feel would impact the values of their homes.
So it would just be a condition of the approval?
Yes.
I do want to point out a little bit from the statute and some other related items. We've been discussing this step-down requirement. This is in PUD, and so you're looking at the overall compatibility with the area, and as the criteria we look at in PUD, because it allows some mixed use and some things that are not allowed in other zones. I did want to also point out that the language in this statute, and this is a 2019 statute that was modified in 2021, so there's no case law, there are no Attorney General opinions. It's difficult to decide, to make an informed decision about what a court would be likely to do or how they would likely to interpret it. But there was some change made in 2021, and just to point out, it says in section D, this section does not apply to, and then if you'll skip down to sub-item 10, the application of a municipal policy, regulation, or ordinance affecting residential building design elements if the application A is applied on an existing property in which residential design elements were regulated on or before February 28, 2019, but not as to any other property thereafter. An existing property is defined above as basically property that was in a zone or in the, let me go back up to it. Under 3, it says, as used in this section, existing property means land within a geographic boundary or district as defined by municipal policy, regulation, or ordinance on or before February 28, 2019. This property, as I recall anyway, has been PRD this whole time while we've been considering all these different submissions of development plans and resubmissions and changes. So it has been subject to the requirements as we have them in our sections for PUD. So I do think that gives us a little bit more leeway than we would have otherwise. I do have some concerns about changing if we allowed the 1,500 in the previous development plan, and then we're not going, we're going to go make it larger than that. That seems a little bit, I hate to see changes that people have relied, if they've, had maybe a reason to rely on that. But anyway, that's just my overview on some things that are related in that statute.
And then also the way that the ordinance reads is that the first phase could be a certain square footage, and the phase behind it that is buffered by that first phase could even be a reduction from that first phase, so they could even go smaller from there. It's just about trying to have that transaction from large homes and not just going down to a small home. You're kind of tiering it out. And of course, there's nothing that our department wants to do to impede housing development, as well as housing that fits the needs of many different homeowners. My daughter was almost homeless today because trying to find a house in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and you just can't find anything right now. That's everywhere. So, of course, we did find something, so she's not going to be homeless. That's a good thing.
She could always move back home.
She doesn't want to do that.
So, has the applicant had any response to you regarding the comment of the requirement of the 1840 and moving from 1500 to 1840?
They, the applicant, and I believe another developer, in the city, had concerns with that based on the state statutes that, cities are not, allowed to regulate, square footages and aesthetics. And those are the arguments in which, you know, we've had to, that's why I wanted to bring it up here, on the public forum so that we can have that discussion. But I think the city attorney pointed out, this is a planned unit development. It's not an R1 or an R2 where the regulations are set in stone and you have the freedom to build based on the code. This is a PUD, and they're set up differently to where it gives flexibility for the cities to make choices based on the surrounding area. And
So there was no limit provided before when the application was made and approved, other than the building, the building assurance. Bill of assurance, excuse me. So the bill of assurance stated it was 1500. We don't enforce that anyway.
And,
So
right.
That's it. And then Natural Trails, just as a matter, they went in first, right?
Yes.
Correct. So then they had the opportunity, and then IM went in, or the previous developer's name of the development came in at 1500 at that point in time.
That's right, and you'll probably find that most of the developments in the city of Maumelle has that square footage. And the reasoning behind that is, in the worst case scenario, if the housing market changes, they don't want to be limited to a large home. And I totally understand that. But also, we've had consistency with housing types within the city of Maumelle throughout Country Club of Arkansas. But in North Little Rock, that housing type has now changed. So we have two cities that are merging into one place, and this is that border point. So I think this is just helping to create a transition from the housing types that are being built in the area and trying to protect that's already been developed in Maumelle and Timberland. And I don't think it's an unreasonable ask, and they've actually provided the elevations of the types of homes that they're trying to conform with from the previous plan, which were two-story and single-story homes. But I think the designs may be a little bit different, but one of the reasons why we wanted this was just to make sure that we were very clear, being a PUD, that you knew exactly what was going to be built, since the builder is not going to be the same as the developer, which is how the code is intended for it to be.
However, what you're showing up there, not necessarily what they're gonna build. Is that correct?
They presented this, so the four housing types that they provided would be the homes that they would build. We would hold that as to the plan. So that's what they would have to come.
They would be required to build those four homes and only those four homes.
That's correct. Well, that's what they presented.
Well, that's a little bit different. They presented it, but, you know, could they change their mind?
Can we make that as a condition on the plan, on the development plan?
Mr. Chair, one of my concerns on one of the public's comments, the last one by Mr. Patel, talks about subsidized housing and low-income development. So how can we prevent that, or you can't?
Well,
with this type of PUD?
and all the homes in that area are selling over $200,000. And those are homes that are smaller than the ones that are being presented here. That's not low income. I actually cut my teeth in affordable homes. I cut my teeth in workforce housing, 80% median income, 60% median income. That's not what this is. And I would find it hard to, I would be careful not to label those that way, but I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can regulate that.
I would caution against getting into that. You know, we need to be concerned about whether these homes are gonna meet our codes and whether it's gonna be a design that's compatible in the structure, the build, the design with the neighboring property. We don't need to concern ourselves with anything that could get into fair housing or any of those issues.
Madam City Attorney, just to clarify something you said earlier, this property has been zoned PRD since prior to February 2019, correct?
Yes.
That's my understanding.
Mr. Chairman, when you're finished.
Yes.
I think I need clarification or information on a few things. The postcards or the emails, I should say, that we received against this, could you summarize that or have it entered in the record what were people for this, against this, or what their comments were? I didn't get a copy of those emails, so, but I do.
They were just provided
Oh.
today.
And I must have knocked them down or something, but could
There
we
they are,
have,
right
there
there.
they are. But could we have that entered into the record and for the people here, just a summary of what each one said, please?
I can,
They're really on record because they're attached to the,
well, they're not attached to the agenda, they were.
well, it mentions the dates in your paperwork,
Okay.
Correct.
Could I
in your
s-
review.
Could I see your copies then, because this is my email that I sent.
Here you go.
Very bottom.
You should have had a copy. Jason had passed them out throughout. Sorry about that.
My second comment goes with the, bill of assurance. We have a draft. Is this from the previous developer or is this from the current developer? We
Well,
have a draft and it would indicate it was going to be signed by Steve K. M. or I'm.
okay. So the owner of the land is the developer currently, and it's the same developer. But the intent is to sell it to a builder after final plat approval.
So can we rely on this bill of assurance? I mean, can the people who buy properties there rely on this, or will there be another one coming through?
Well, that's in preliminary stage, and if there's anything, of course, we don't review the bill of assurance.
We do under certain circumstances if there are common elements and we have concerns about those being maintained. There are some common properties in this. I will point out, and I'm sorry I read this after I spoke to you earlier today, Ms. Landis, but there is a note that the access easements, parks, and all open spaces areas shall be maintained by the POA via improvement district, which I believe is a change, and that's on the notes on the preliminary development plan itself. Do we know when they plan to complete all of the county paperwork to create an improvement district and what the timeline is for that?
Do not. Only the applicant representative, Roy?
Final plat.
Roy Andrews, 3 Monarch Drive. That would be changed, and it would get changed with the final plat and final development plan.
Okay, that's a little bit of a process, so I just didn't know if y'all were gonna move forward on that sooner rather than later.
No, I don't think so.
Mr. Grummer, is your concern, and if I understood your comments correctly, is that because we have a change and we have a developer and we have a builder over here, now we have two different entities that perhaps the common interest of his, I guess his progress bottom line, if you will, is that you feel like there's you've added this. I just want to make sure that this measure of protection that we may place on this tonight kind of provides an additional level of insurance that the development's going to move forward as he intends.
Well, I'm not too sure. I don't know. All I'm doing is providing recommendations based on changes.
Because before, we had the same development before us, and wasn't any concern brought forward, and this is the only thing that I see different. I mean, he's got a different plan. I don't know what the delta is on the lots for sure. So that's the biggest thing. We still have a residential developer.
Right.
The builder is not the developer, and now we're placing a requirement because it's not. And because if it was a concern about continuity with the north trails, that existed beforehand. Those houses were going in as well, and if there was concern, then it seems like we'd have the same authority to put the same square footage requirement on that developer, which was IM at the time, but we did not do so. Or it was not recommended.
And it is, I will say it is I think, relevant that the developer and the builder are separate, because that's, that's, when you're looking at a PUD, it's kind of set out that it is one comprehensive process, so.
Well, but the PUD states that the builder and developer are the same. And that's part of what I put in, when you look at the wording of the purpose of this, the combination review permits, when you go through, this system is advantageous when the developer who plats the land and provides access and utilities is the same developer to actually construct the buildings and provide the amenities that make the overall project marketable. So the point of a PUD is where the developer comes with a vision, and that vision is provided to the city, and they're the ones who set that, the dynamics of that, and they're the ones who build it. But when you have a developer that creates a vision and then sells it to a different builder that may have a different vision, we have to make sure that we have enough information so that the builder who's getting this complies with what is approved. And that's what I wanted to do here, is to make sure that the vision that was cast previously from the developer I had concerns that the housing types and may be different. And it's fine. I just want to make sure that everybody on the public's and the commission understands this is what is approved to go there before it goes in, and we approve the permits on it.
Mr. Drummond, question. Since it's been a couple of years since you've seen the preliminary with Mr. M, and he's now coming back, and he is now asking for us to approve phase 2. Are there any changes to phase 2 that we saw originally? Or any changes to phase 1 that we saw originally?
So to answer that question, essentially the lots are pretty much the same. The big difference is it's no longer going to be gated. If you remember, a month or two ago, they were going to come in and have it gated. It was going to be an enclave. So there was only going to be the emergency easement on the southwest corner. Being that it's no longer going to be an enclave, the developer agreed to go ahead and extend the southern drive, which is Jonathan Drive, all the way to Kim Drive. So that also, actually, that does really help out fire and first responder access by having an actual dedicated road intersection off the Kim Drive. So that is those are the main differences. The lot layouts do not appear to have changed from the March of 2020.
Lot sizes not changed, because, looking in here at phase 2, you've got lot 104 that's 36 feet by 98 feet. It seems like a very small lot. Are they squeezing something in here, or, that's...
Well, and some of that, and I apologize, some of that may have been not caught on the front end, which is probably a good thing for the review whenever I was going through it. The 34 is actually not taking into account the radius on those corners, but corner lots are required to be a little wider in order to accommodate the increased setbacks. So that's one of my comments, was to consider widening the corner lots so that the builder doesn't have a challenge with putting the housing footprint and complying with the setback requirements.
And, and again, that was my point. I think that we saw 2 years ago preliminary for both phases, I think. But I couldn't remember whether they're squeezing more lots in here or not.
And you saw a preliminary for both phases, but we only approved the first phase, and in the minutes, I had stated that you would be able to reapprove the second phase because there was concern that Kiln Drive would not be asphalted and finished out, and we had a requirement for that to be finished out. So we wanted to come back and verify that.
Yeah, well, that's in North Little Rock, so it's not monumental.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the director. Most of your comments deal with square footages of the properties. So could you clarify for me, because I'm getting confused at this point, what we approved the first time, what was the minimum square footage, and now what are we looking at as proposed for a minimum square footage, and what are you recommending?
So there were no minimum square footages approved during the first approval because of the housing types that were presented. And we've been that way with other subdivisions. We're not going to be that way now. We're not going to be as laxed on that process just because of this issue that's come up. The recommendations that I'm making is at least the first phase or tier meet that reduction requirement and have those houses at least at a minimum square footages of, I'd say, the 1,740 square feet, which is 13%, because you do have the commercial lots that are in front of it. There is some visibility across the drainage and right there at the street, and that's not as extreme as 1840. And I think 1740 is a sufficient square footage for a normal size home. But it's a little larger than those that are being built to the south.
So originally, there were no requirements for minimum square footage. What's proposed by their bill of assurance is to have a minimum of 1,500 square feet for a single-story home, and you're recommending 1,740 as the minimum for a single-story home. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Was that just in phase one?
Just in phase one. And then phase two, again, the reductions can be, you're going to be closer to the 1,500.
So based upon your review, Madam Attorney, in light of the state law, can we impose this restriction?
So because it is in PRD, and it was in PRD at the time, and subject to the step-down requirements, that I don't believe those have been changed during this time, it appears. So no interpretive materials to rely on, so that's just looking at the statute and what the plain reading appears to be.
In the applicant, do you not get any indication of the applicant either concurs with your opinion or not?
I have not spoken to the applicant, so that would be for Mr. Gromer.
I have not spoken with the applicant.
Mr. Lyon, a comment?
Just for record, I'm looking at the minutes from the February 27th, 2020 meeting when this was approved by the Planning Commission. And looking through the minutes, there is no talk of square footage. So I assume what was in the bill of assurance is what was done. And there is a comment from the city attorney that the bill of assurance was to be preliminary and obviously be final approval with the final plat, as she discussed earlier.
Well, Mr. Chairman, my concern is how do we get consistency and clarity with the bill of assurance and the recommendations from staff and what will be in our motion?
Wish I had an easy answer for you. Madam City Attorney, any sage advice on that question?
How do we get say it again, I'm sorry, I thought it was addressed to him.
So we have a bill of assurance that has one number for minimum square foot for both a one-story house and a two-story house. And that's floating out there. We have copies of that. And then we have a recommendation from staff on what the minimum square footage should be for phase one, and for phase two, it just says it should be consistent with dwelling sizes across both phases. I'm not sure what that means. And we're going to be required to make a motion. And how do we get consistency, and what can we legally recommend or vote on?
I think you have to look at the preliminary development plan as it's presented, and including whatever assurances they've given us, and to your best judgment, make a decision on whether it's compatible and in compliance with the code. And if you think it's not, tell them what they need to change about it. And if they need to phase in the step-down requirements, then that may be what your decision is based on. Or you may have other concerns.
Well, one of the issues that I had with this as I looked at it is I understand having a need in the community for different types of homes, both for the design of them and the cost, the square footage, et cetera.
And most of the concerns that were voiced by email to us talk about the size. Neighbors want something that is compatible. So when you look at our development standards in section 94-449, it says the primary emphasis shall be placed upon achieving compatibility between the proposed development and the surrounding areas so as to preserve and enhance the neighborhood. So that's a development standard that we have that we're supposed to consider. But at the same time, we also know there's a need for smaller housing, and we have something in front of us that doesn't appear to be compatible. And so I guess I'm not asking a question, it's probably of all the people on the commission, is how do we balance what's a development standard in our code about having compatibility? Then we have these smaller homes and a bill of assurance that is not compatible with the recommendation from our staff. So I'll just throw that out.
I think that's probably a good question. I mean, I think that's best addressed to the applicant.
Comment, Mr. Andrews?
Restate the question.
How do we have to make a decision. And on our vote, we have an ordinance that talks that the primary emphasis shall be upon achieving compatibility. We have citizens who've taken the time to comment, and their comment is compatibility. And we have a plan in front of us that has a bill of assurance that has a minimum size of 1,500 square feet. And we have a professional staff making a recommendation to us, minimum of 1,740 feet. So how do we reconcile all that? I mean, that's what we really all are faced with right now.
Part of my question would be compatible with the surrounding area, so compatible with the surrounding houses in that area. And we do have two different types of houses. Do you say compatible with the majority of the houses? Or compatible with the next neighborhood over? So at what point do you draw that line in the sand? I think you could consistently go around Maumelle and see from one neighborhood to the next that it's the only thing dividing that is either the boulevard or Odom or some other street. And you're going to see a change in square footages of several hundred, if not nearly 1,000 square feet. And that doesn't make the style of the house, the quality of the house, the price of the house that greatly different. It doesn't change the resident that lives in that house. Yes, you're faced with somewhat of a hard decision to make, but Maumelle is based on housing for, a variety of people. We want everybody in our community. We want development in our community, and whether that be a small house or a big house. I spent 1.5 years in Nashville not too long ago, right before COVID hit, and the big thing was not the big houses anymore, but come in and build some tall and skinny houses or build more affordable housing in neighborhoods that didn't have that. But it allowed people to move into the area. And whether those are starter homes or people are retiring in those homes, people like different size square footages.
Well, my house is 2,900 square feet. My neighbor's is 1,950, right next door. But if you look at the two houses, you don't know that.
Of the 4 houses that were presented to us and represented as being typical of what's going to be built and which may end up being a condition of what may or may not be approved, do those houses comply with the bill of assurance that you all drafted, that it's 1,500 square feet for a 1-story building?
I don't have the square footages on those, but I believe that is correct, just looking at the size of the house.
And looking at this, if we're talking compatibility, really the only thing we're going to get close to is square footage. I mean, you look over at Natural Trail Estates, nothing, even in the 2,000 square foot range is gonna be probably materials compatible with those houses. Those are some very, very high-end houses, and if you look at some of this, the commentary we received via email, it wasn't just size. There did seem to be a bit of concern directed at the potential buyer-builder of this. Roush Coleman, they do what they do it very well, and it is not everybody's cup of tea. And that's, whether this is 1,500, 1,700, 1,800 square feet, they're going to build the homes the way they know how to, and the way they do very well, which I think is still going to present, based on certain interpretations, a compatibility issue with the development across the street. But it's going to be very compatible with the development in North Little Rock right across Kim Drive.
But
Square footage does not drive compatibility.
Correct. I mean, the materials are going to be pretty well as presented here, and I don't know if that's something that we can regulate.
But
that was kind of my point to that. I mean, there's 950 square feet between my house and my neighbor's house.
Yeah, unless we're starting talking about brick and ephes and siding and
But-
architectural shingles, standard shingles.
we do have some strict building codes, and those houses will be coming before our building permit office. So they will have to meet all of that, and they'll have to meet code enforcement throughout the construction.
So if you do look at the bill of assurance, the bill of assurance right now does talk about an architectural committee, and it also has in there, as far as material, it must be 50% brick or of a concrete fiber, something like hardy board or something of that nature. So there is that requirement already in the current BOA, if the materials is a concern.
I just think square footage shouldn't be what we're worried about,
What do you think we should be worried about on this?
not square footage.
Well, you
I
can
mean,
say
I just proved that.
80% brick coverage, or you can say buffers. If you look at compatibility to those are the things that are really of meat value, not the square footage of the home. That's my opinion.
Do the PRD regulations allow us to regulate materials?
I don't think the PRD regulations discuss exterior facade.
That kind of gets what
No.
that kind of gets what gets
This
into
state
what we
law
can
says
do.
you can't.
Well, if it existed prior to February 2019, yes, we could, which we have the step-down requirement, so we can regulate the square footage, but as far as 80% brick, 50% brick, it's
I think
really
our
at the
building
developer's
code
mercy.
will cover all of that.
Correct.
That's my opinion.
It would cover the materials you use on the outside of the
Yes.
house, or how the materials are applied?
Quality.
Well, I mean, it's gonna tell you what the materials have to be.
In
Not our-
residential,
So if you go
Not
to
in
a
residential.
permit, they're not gonna look to see what the bill of assurance says, are they?
Typically, the bill of assurance is what regulates the materials on the homes that they have to comply with.
That's a private enforcement that we can't have anything to do with.
Yeah,
the thing here is that they've submitted a plan, they've submitted these homes, but, that's, if we want to get more particular, we want a color rendering, we want them to identify materials, we can do that. I mean, they've submitted, this is the home they're gonna build. I don't know if that was not included in our packet. I don't have it. It was on the electronic site, but it wasn't in my packet anyway.
Right.
So I don't know if anybody else had it vacant in the packet. It was on the electronic site. When I made reference, I went and looked at
It
it.
wasn't in my packet, but
So-
we did have a color
So,
copy.
so I didn't get to look at it in detail before today, but if the materials, the bill of materials is on there, if they have an FS requirement or minimum FS or minimum brick, then they can be held to that, according to the comments that Mr. Germer provided, is that that's the intent. They're building 4 styles of homes, and that's what they're gonna build.
Mr. Chairman, there's been a lot of discussion about the bill of assurance. It's always been my understanding, we don't regulate the bill of assurance.
That's correct. We don't regulate the bill of assurance, but this is a preliminary development plan. So when you're looking at what's submitted as part of that preliminary development plan, it may include, they may submit the bill of assurance in showing what their development plan is. I mean, that overall, it's what's, on this giant sheet of paper, but I mean, they can also provide that for us to consider when looking at the overall plan.
But we have no say in what that
We
bill of
don't
assurance-
enforce it.
Correct.
We don't enforce the bill of assurance, but we do enforce the preliminary development plan. So if they submit a preliminary development plan and a bill of assurance together as part of their overall submission,
Well,
We are
but
re-
it's-
we are
but it's
required.
The way I
The city
understand it
requires
is, we can consider the proposed bill of assurance as evidence that they will comply with the regulations. So if they have a bill of assurance saying, we're going to hit 1,840 square feet, okay, that's our indication that they're going to be the step down. But otherwise, no, we can't dictate that it has any particular language.
Then why do we have a staff recommendation on it? Staff comment 2 is, a general note should be added to the plat referring to the bill of assurance filed for record and state the minimum square footage allowed. You know, I've always understand these are, these like covenants, and we don't enforce them, but we certainly are talking about them and using them to make a decision on this, because it's the only indicator that we're getting on what type of development it's going to be. And almost all the staff comments are dealing with the same issue, and it's minimum square footage.
It could be a plat note.
It could, yeah. There are multiple ways to do that. A reference to the bill of assurance on the plat notes is the same thing as an explicit plat note. It just incorporates it by reference.
So,
But yes, we could accomplish the same thing via notes on the plan or the plat.
So, I made a statement which might have been in error, but nobody corrected me, so I guess it was factual. That these 4 styles of homes and the information that was submitted by the developer, he is required to build those styles of home in this phase.
If we make it a condition of any approval that's granted.
So we have to make that as a condition. If that's what we're gonna do, and if it's defensible by law.
I think it should at least be, if they've submitted those 4 styles of homes as indicating these are the styles of homes we're going to build, and this is our overall development plan, then what they build should at least be consistent with that. Now, if it's a slightly different color, if a window's moved, if it's changed, obviously there are gonna be some changes here and there, but it should generally be consistent.
Well, were they submitted? They weren't part of the application that we saw. Were they submitted to the planning department?
Yes, they were, and I apologize, I thought they were in the packet. They were
at subcommittee.
They were included in the subcommittee, and they were included in the digital packet, but for some reason they weren't provided from the applicant whenever they submitted their packet.
Jason, did you put those on the screen by chance? Jason, can you pull those up? Please go.
Now, one thing I didn't put in my comments as a suggestion or recommendation, because I didn't want to touch too much on the aesthetics, but again, within a PUD, if you're trying to consider compatibility with the surrounding area, one consideration might be the materials on the houses that are actually fronting White Oak Crossing at least be a material consistent with that adjacent from it. So maybe a high quality material, all brick on 1 or 3 facades, minimum. A consideration for all brick on the houses that front White Oak Crossing. I don't know if that would be a,
there isn't any house that fronts White Oak Crossing.
Gonna be to the back?
no, the fronts will be facing.
They'll be on M Drive, which is, I guess, could.
Okay.
The back side of the
Crossing.
commercial lots.
Everything's back to commercial lot, so
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Once
the
commercial's
driveway
built,
out.
you may not see them.
Well, whenever you come down White Oak Crossing, when you come to the drainage, you can see the lots directly across that drainage. It's a wide open span.
I have a question for the applicant.
Yes,
What
ma'am.
would be the impact if this was deferred until the next meeting to get all of these bits and pieces we seem to be talking about put together in some coherent form so we know what we're actually voting on?
I would have to ask the the developer what the cost of the loan and the interest would be to delay it another 30 days. I mean, that's really what, I can't answer that question. That's his ability to sell it and move to construction of the next phase, the phase 2, trying to get that done.
as of right now, the applicant is Mr. M.
That's-
Russ Coleman's not even in the picture at this point.
Right.
That is correct. And
Right.
so I do have a question. If you approve that particular house, since Roush Coleman's name's on that, does that mean it has to be built by him or by that company? I mean, I don't know what leeway we got
I mean,
there.
on a preliminary development plan, I think it's, if we're not gonna have the same builder as the developer, I don't know that it matters who the builder is.
Okay.
I mean, but they do have to build consistent with the development plan.
Okay, so that style of house and,
But you're talking about two different people, that's where we're getting real confused here, I think.
And that's the challenge with the PUD.
in a
Having a
lot of our
different-
subdivisions, whether they're R1, R2, multifamily, PRD, there's typically multiple builders within that development. There's usually one developer that develops the land,
But he
And-
has sold the property.
and he
to
sells the
builders.
property to a group of builders. Might do a lot draw, there's a couple things they do.
This particular one, though, is Mr. M is selling it to the developer's builder. Roscomm's Ross Coleman is building this out.
He would be building the houses.
Yeah.
That company would build the houses, that's
So
correct.
he is the builder.
Right.
Commissioner Landis?
I have a question for the director and then a suggestion to go, we could maybe go through each staff comment and see if we can get agreement to get ready to make a motion.
Go ahead.
But my question for the director is, when we're looking at these minimum square footage and you're looking at reductions for adjacent properties, is that a suggestion in the code or is it actually a code requirement?
It is a code, well, it's a code requirement in the R1 zone, and the PUD, wording in the PUD, says that you use the R1 as a guide. And ultimately, I'm using that as a guide, which is under the sections that I referenced of the reduction dwelling size. And that was one of the things that I saw that could accommodate some of the concerns of the residents that have come to the
And am
table.
I accurate if I make a statement that the square footages that you recommended in staff comments 3 and 4 are of greater size than the minimum square footage in the bill of assurance?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. So could we go through the staff comments one by one and try to knock them out?
That's your commission as well as mine, you can.
Does everyone else want to do that?
I only have
Some of them don't require action, so, number one's comment. But fine, go ahead. Yeah, Mr. Chair, how you want to?
Yeah, Commissioner Landis, go ahead.
Before that happens, I've got one question. What we're doing here is approving the preliminary plat, are we not? What else is there?
Development plan.
Preliminary development plan, preliminary
Preliminary
plan.
development plan, what else are we approving?
Plat's after.
Sir?
The plat's the next agenda item.
The preliminary plat, yes.
But
It's the same.
can we not move on with this one?
I don't guess I understand your question or your comment, Mike.
If you would like to make a to call the question on the floor to approve this as submitted, you may.
I call the question to approve this as submitted.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
I'd like for the applicant to understand, so if this goes down, what's the applicant's recourse so he understands? If the motion does not pass,
The motion
it's
does,
it's a year, right?
without a waiver.
The preliminary development plan?
This is
I
not.
think he has
This
the
is a,
other
this is
what I'm
a
asking.
recommendation, so they can appeal to, so that
council.
they appeal to council.
Yeah,
Okay.
this
It still goes to the city council.
This
Yes.
is purely
So
a
it's
recommendation.
This
either
is
do pass
purely
or
a
not pass,
recommendation.
So it still goes to council regardless?
Yes, it's
Okay,
a
thank you.
recommendation.
Thank you. I
All
didn't
right,
know.
any discussion on the motion or any commentary?
You asked
Ed.
for discussion. I'll be voting no on that because I'm not sure what we're approving. I don't know if we're approving all the comments from the staff and this whole issue of the minimum square
Yes.
footage. Nobody seems to know, and I think it's a premature motion.
Thank you for your willingness to work through it though, but we're gonna be here another couple hours and go through, and I don't know if we get consensus anyway.
And I'll add in the comment that I really don't see that anything has changed in the past year and a half that would require us to up the square footage from what we approved previously. The development to the south was contemplated then, the development across White Oak was contemplated then. So but I don't see a reason to go more restrictive now. All right, any further discussion on the motion? Those in favor to issue a do pass recommendation to council of preliminary development plan as submitted, those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no?
No.
All right, looks like we have a vote of 5 to 1. We will issue a do pass recommendation. All right, let's move on to the proposed
That would be
preliminary.
4 to 2. Scott's not here. He's automatic.
I just wanted to.
Correct. It'd be 5 to 2.
Sorry to correct you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the proposed preliminary plat. Do we have any further staff report?
The main point that I had was the corner lots need to be readjusted prior to the final plat and allow that at staff approval. Jason, do you have anything else?
Any discussion on the preliminary plat?
Would that then come back to us?
No, sir, we would evaluate it to make sure it complies.
That would be taken care of by staff?
That's correct.
Further discussion? Does anyone have a motion?
Motion to approve the proposed preliminary plat for the Cypress Bend revised development plan.
Second.
Have a motion?
This is the development or plat?
Plat.
Plat.
We did the development plat last.
So this
We've already
is
voted on
this
the
is
plan.
phase plat.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm just reading what was written on the agenda.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Those opposed, no. All right, motion passes. Move on to item number 3, Heatley Heights. Staff report, please.
Mr. Chair, this is approximately 4.47 acres located at 301 Commerce Street. An existing 2 lots that's being proposed into 3-lot subdivision. Lots per gross acre of 3.5 in a zone C3. The applicant proposes a replat of lot number 1, Cary and Fraser's second subdivision, and lot number 30, Maumelle Industrial Park, La Petite, replatting from 2 lots into 3 commercial lots. The preliminary plat has no deficiencies. Currently, city engineer approval for drainage to be looked at in the future development plans. Staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat contingent on meeting all staff, city engineer, and planning commissioner comments pursuant to section 70-73. Jason, do you have anything else?
No comments other than the utilities did have some comments that the applicant would have to address prior to any development. Do note that this is being divided up into 3 lots, of which 2 of the lots already have existing structures on them. So.
Discussion from the commission? Does anyone have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the proposed preliminary plat for the Hedley Heights subdivision pending any other staff or commissioner comments.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no. All right, motion is approved. Now move on to item number 4, the Heatley Heights Lot 3 site plan review. Staff report, please.
So, Mr. Chair, this is representing one of the lots in the previous preliminary plat subdivision that you've approved, an existing building that's looking for an expansion of a parking lot and construction of a driveway access to support a remodel on an existing structure and change of use from daycare to business office, which is allowed in a C3 zone. The applicant seeks 2 variances, which are described in the report below, along with the reasoning from the applicant. This will require BZA approval, so you will have to convene the BZA for that. Drainage for the site will need to be reviewed and approved by the city engineer. There's been no public comments received on this item and no further utility comments. Then staff comments, I'll let, Jason, do you want to touch on those? Or do you want me to touch on them?
So on the site plan, and this is where we may have to, we'll have to convene Board of Zoning adjustment. The first one is they are doing a proposed parking area behind the existing structure. And they're proposing it to be gravel, per section 94374. This would be needed because our standards require paved or concrete. And regardless of the surface, the proposed parking area will need to be curbed. We feel gravel parking would be low impact design if done correctly and could help with sheet flow off of the site. The drive to the parking lot is only 8 to 12 foot wide and will need to be one lane in and out. Appropriate signage will be needed. This would be for the second variance, in that a drive for 2 ways would have to be 20 feet. And would be extenuating circumstances which we'll let the applicant detail during the Board of Zoning Adjustment hearing once it's convened. I will note the parking area behind, though, is needed as the current configuration of the site plan would not meet minimum parking requirements. By putting the parking lot in the back, they would be able to meet the office requirements for the minimum parking standards.
Thank you, Mr. Lyon. So we'll now recess the planning commission and convene the Board of Zoning Adjustment. We will consider the first variance to section 94-374D regarding the proposed gravel parking lot.
So that one, they're requesting pervious paving in the rear parking lot. They state that they have been seeking certification in low-impact development, stormwater management, and believe that gravel parking lots in areas not seen from the street are a good way to promote on-site infiltration of nearly 90% of local storm events. Of course, that is something that I've been trying to bring into the city. We don't have ordinances on low-impact development. It's something that I'd like to bring in, but we just don't have it in the code right now. The parking lot is not visible from the street, so this is one of those things that they could utilize to provide that value, reduce the stormwater runoff, which we have issues all over the city on. But the requirements that we placed was that it would be curbed in to hold the gravel and make it feasible. Staff recommends approval of the variance.
May I ask a question?
Commissioner Winnick?
My question has to do with, I appreciate, the low impact development practices and how do we grow those into our code so we don't have to go through these type of variances or feel like we're needing to have this frequent type, because this is, some of the green practices that we want. My only question, though, with this type of practice, is there any concern over time of erosion? Or again, I'm not an engineer and a builder, so that's part of the design work that the builder will do, correct, when they do this type of design?
Mr. Andrews?
Roy Andrews, 3 Monarch Drive. Yes, it would have to be designed to prevent erosion, and there would be some maintenance that would be required.
I had to do some homework on it to better understand if it was just gravel, or then I saw, no, it could be with some sort of grids and gravel placed in that to prevent erosion. So that's, again,
There are
just
multiple ways.
aesthetic, and again, the runoff would be to the post office, I think, from what I could see.
Yes.
That's all.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the requirement still is guttering around.
Correct.
You can't dump on a adjoining property.
Right, we would still need to run through the calculations to
redirect
prevent,
it.
that's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Landis?
Yes, I think there's a lot of ways that you can deal with pervious paving, and it's certainly something we should do, but I think we do that with a change in the ordinance. Because if you look at the variance standards, there's nothing unique about this property. Every property that comes in to be built or to be expanded has to meet parking requirements, and those parking requirements talk about a hard surface.
And so there's nothing about this that's unusual. I would hope that we would change our code and have some well-researched language in there about methods that it works, but my concern is it doesn't meet the requirements for a variance. Also, there's a tendency, I've seen other ways of doing this with pavers, that you have the same result, but often with gravel, you not only get the dust, but you get weeds growing up, and it's difficult for people with wheelchairs and canes to navigate. So I'll be voting no on this, not because I don't think we should look at pervious paving, but we should do that with an ordinance change and not through the variance process.
I would point out that the ADA accessible parking would be in the front on the gravel, on the existing asphalt driveway, so that would not, ADA
I did check that, that's good.
would not be an issue there. Grass is not necessarily a bad thing in pervious paving. When it tends to rain more, the grass tends to grow a little better, and as the summer dries out, the grass actually will find a way to grow where you don't want it to. It'll usually grow more in the gravel than it will in your yard, unfortunately, unless you're watering it all the time. I would point out this property is east of the boulevard. It's skirting the industrial park, and we do have several other properties, though not Zone C3, that do utilize gravel for parking surfaces, for auxiliary parking.
Thank you.
I would generally agree with the statement that, any push towards pervious pavement should be dealt with via ordinance, but I think there are some unique circumstances. I mean, this property's been around since, before really any of these regulations and the requirement to add more parking, and the layout of this property makes it a requirement, this extra parking, which I understand, it's gonna be employee-only parking, correct?
That is correct.
I mean, it has to go in the rear, and I think it being behind the building does kind of mitigate some of the factors, but at least of the visual or the aesthetic qualities of a paved parking lot. So, I think there are some considerations that would support a variance.
I think I agree with Ms. Landis regarding this, and although I think that is a pretty good stretch to say you're going to get 90% of additional capture or on-site infiltration is a little bit of a stretch, but we don't have to break out engineering codes and books to demonstrate that. I guess this is directed to Mr. Drummer. We're all for low impact. I think everybody on this commission, I think the council and lots of people. But if we're serious about it, we need to get serious about it. And I don't know what's preventing us from doing that. I hear that we want to do it, and this is not a means to do it. I think this is an application where we could perhaps look a little bit the other way and let it go on and in. But I'm not interested in, if we're going to get serious about it, let's get serious about it. Let's have some communication. Let's have some workshops to implement something, because enforcement by variance is not a way to plan.
And if we do get serious about it, being new, I don't know how you do that, but do we form a subcommittee so we can provide assistance to staff as they look at this? Do we need to get approval from the city council to get policy direction that this is the way they want to go?
If the mayor's serious about it, then he'll put some direction in place. If Scott's serious about it, he should as well. But, we talk a good game, but we're not doing anything about it. And I think everybody supports it, but there's no ordinance in place to do anything with it. And so, and I'm not a big fan of gravel. I think there's other impervious type options that are there. All of them cost money to do. It is just, it is just a parking lot. Doesn't have much more function than that. But it's going to be dusty. You take it. It's going to create dust when it parks. So the cars, the vehicles, they'll all get dust, and it'll get dust adjacent. So I'd like to see a little bit. My preference would be a different impervious, but we're probably, we can debate what that is. We don't have any guidance from staff. I can give my opinion on what that is, but that doesn't mean, you guys would, and plus it costs money, and so there's no basis for it. So,
as a engineer and fellow commissioner that brings projects to the city, we would certainly like a way that would be different than a variance.
I'm not. Whether this goes or not, and and the applicant of how it's moved through and what the first says, that's fine, but I'm not in support of any others coming through just because, hey, we want to be low impact. If, saying it and doing it and then enforcing it are all different things, and I've been on here a long time, and planning by variance is a very poor method of moving a desire through. So it should be dealt with.
Further discussion? Do we have a motion on the parking lot variance?
Chairman, I make a motion to approve the variance as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no?
Aye.
We have a vote of 5-2 with Commissioner Smith's absence. The variance is approved. We move on to the sub-item A2, the variance regarding the width of the driveway. Staff report.
So this one, this variance is a little unique. In order to meet the parking requirements, obviously they have a drive to get back to that parking lot. You cannot get to it on the west side of the property. There's a significant hill with a bunch of rocks, a wooden stairway that I think would be significant cost to remove all that. And then on the east side, on the post office side, there is roughly, I think it comes out to about 16 feet from the tip of the building to the fence or property line. So section 94604C3 requires 20-foot entry exit. All they have is the max room of 12 feet to get around the side of that building and up to the proposed parking lot. With that said, that is, I believe they are making it an employee only, and obviously we would request it, have signs put up for employee only to extremely limit the traffic there. So I would, again, here I'll let the applicant discuss their rationale.
I think you stated it quite well. There's not access around either side of the building really due to the old parcel. I mean, this property has been there for a while, and it's very tight on the property and sits kind of, it's meant to be parallel with the road. The property's not perpendicular to the road, so it creates some unique problems. And if we could go to the other side, the tutus and tennis shoes, that would be great, but that riprap rock on that side really is stabilizing that slope. And you would have to, because it's an uphill slope, to build a retaining wall, you'd have to build it on the other property just to try to get access around that side.
If you don't mind, to clarify one of the comments also from staff, there was a portion on the staff that said the drive is only 8 feet. Is it 8 feet or 12 feet I guess at the smallest? Or is there a range where it's going as it squeezes by the building?
It's 12 feet wide.
12 feet wide all the way?
Yes. We're at next down at 16 feet 2 inches, or 16.2 feet right at the corner. Yes, we're very close to the property line and very close to the building, but we can maintain separation.
Well, that fence will go down, that's on that west side then? The
Part
other
of it
fence?
will, yes.
Okay.
Any discussion from the commission?
I'll make a motion. Based on the shape, the topography, and the existing development on the site, I move to approve the variance request as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no? Motion is approved. Move to sub-item B, the proposed landscape plan. Staff report, please. Oh. No, adjourn the Board of Zoning Adjustment and reconvene the Planning Commission. Thank you, Mr. Lyon. Yep. Oh, yeah. Now we're back to the site plan.
I have no further comments. Jason?
No further comments.
Further commissioner discussion? Does anyone have a motion on the site plan?
Make a motion to approve the preliminary plat. No, the site plan, sorry. Where are we? Proposed site plan for the Hedley Heights, Lot 3.
Second.
Motion and second, any discussion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no? Site plan is approved. Now move into the landscape plan, staff report.
Mr. Chair, the landscape buffer on the east side is less than 4 feet. However, in a C3 zone, side back is 0 adjacent to the non-residential. All landscaping is shown behind the existing structure, so the preference would be to have the landscaping in the front to meet standards where in the public view shed. So even though the modifications are happening in the rear of the property, we are asking for some modifications to the front.
Have the suggested modifications been discussed with the applicant at the staff level?
Yes, they were, and as you look at, this is actually the current plan that you're seeing. They have added they've added some hedgerows up in the front, as well as 5 trees that would meet the 30-foot requirement. So their landscaping has gone above what's required.
On this property, any landscaping is an improvement.
Anything done to
It's been
the building
empty a
would
long
be an
time,
improvement to
hasn't
the
it?
city. Motion to approve the landscaping plan as presented in staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no? All right, landscape plan is approved. Move on to item number 5, the Tri-Victus reclass. Staff report, please.
Mr. Chair, this is 9.06 acres located at 305 Murphy Drive, currently Lot 1 RR Tri-Victus subdivision. The applicant proposes a 2-lot subdivision as part of a replat of Lot 1 RR Tri-Victus. The 2 lots are being replatted for a future development mix of industrial and commercial uses pursuant to Section 70-43. Lot 1B of the proposed subdivision as I-1 zoning would not meet the street frontage requirements per Section 94-414 and 70-135, requiring every lot to abut upon a public street. In addition, per Section 70-140, commercial and Section 70-141, industrial private streets are not allowed except as service easements. The overall plans presented to staff show intent for Lot 1B to be replatted and merged into previously approved Harrison Pfeiffer addition, which once completed would provide the required frontage along Commercial Park Drive. Staff comments have been added to address these concerns. Previous approvals for the Harris and Pfeiffer subdivision discussed topographical buffers to separate this industrial lot from the downzone property to the west. This proposed subdivision and intended merger with Harris and Pfeiffer would make the commercial zone property more developable and provide room for natural buffers such as dense tree canopies between the 2 zones. Lastly, Lot 1A use concepts have been presented as mixed warehouse office type use, which when coupled with the adjacent C2 would compare to a PCD type zone, which allows for these uses to be mixed and would work well for the transitions from this area to the existing industrial park in keeping with the original intent with the Harrison Pfeiffer rezone development. Utility comments have come in from CAW and were provided. City planning comments have been provided. There's 3 of those. Specifically, comment number 1, Lot 1B should be labeled unbuildable on the preliminary plat with the general note stating Lot 1B to be unbuildable until such time it is replatted to meet the lot frontage requirements for its zone. Now I realize that this is not something that's necessarily described in the ordinance, but it's something that I've dealt with in the past with subdivision reviews in situations where they're trying to do a land development deal, and the only other option that I have is tell them to do an illegal subdivision and sell the lot by meets and bounds and then replat it with the other land that they want to do later on. But as planning director, I can't tell them to do an illegal subdivision by ordinance. They have to subdivide anything under 5 acres. So since there's not frontage, the best way to do it is to make it temporarily unbuildable until such time that they can meet the intent of the ordinance with a replat, which is what the intent is in the future. So that's the reason for that comment. 70-140, A4 private streets and commercial. Again, a general note should be added to the preliminary plat stating that the 50-foot access easement is a service easement only and not intended for primary access to lot 1B. You'll notice that access reaches that lot, and they may not use that in the future. They may, I'm not too sure, but ultimately that's for the temporary platting of this to show some access, 50 foot, but again, it would not be primary, and it still needs a primary access from a road. And then section 70-141 concerning the private streets, staff comment number 2 resolves that. So staff recommends approval contingent upon all staff and city engineer and planning commissioner comments. And Jason, do you have anything else?
Mr. Drummer? Lot 1B, if I understood what you said right, would be unbuildable in its present state. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if the Harris Pfeiffer development never acquired 1B, they'd have to come back and ask for a replat to put it all together again, wouldn't they?
That's correct.
So are we not jumping the gun here?
Roy Andrews, 3 Monarch Drive. The intent is to answer that question directly, at that point, if the deal fell through, the plat you would never see a final plat, therefore the property would never be divided. And this would all be a moot point. If the development goes forward, then it is Mr. Pfeiffer's intent to combine that 1B lot with the Harris Pfeiffer development that we brought in before, the hillside. And
There's a big cut there, is there not?
there is a big cut, yeah, and actually now we have a cut on each side. That would take that into account and grade through that when it's built out, and would combine this with the front lot.
So I guess my question is, why are we doing this now? Until there's a formal agreement between the parties.
So Mr. Pfeiffer has not purchased the property yet. He is looking to purchase the property, and it's to his desire that if y'all saw the other plan that was presented about the potential development there, that is of his interest. If he can do that, then he wants to buy the property. If he can't subdivide it, then he doesn't have an interest in it.
Can you provide any more insight as to what the level of interest is? I mean, are we talking contingent contract, just this might be fun to do in some year's time? What are we talking about here?
I don't think it's fun to do. Oh, well, he does enjoy it. Mr. Pfeiffer does enjoy it. I think he's getting at the point where he wants to get rid of more land than take on. He just sees the advantage that while the front property is somewhat narrow, this gives him more depth with that commercial piece, makes it more developable. And knowing that that's a deep industrial lot, really where it's at, it's almost too deep. And it makes sense with more of this warehouse, this small warehouse flex space. And he has a realtor out looking at that right now.
You know, my question is, I guess my statement would be that knowing Gene, it all is gonna boil down to how much can he buy it for?
And
if he can't agree upon that price, then there is no deal.
he has it under contract to buy.
Oh, well, then, you know, that's you at stake. If he's got it
Yes,
under contract.
he has it,
then that's a
yes, he
different
does
deal.
have it under contract to buy.
Pending this.
Yes.
It'd be nice if we'd have the copy of the contract.
I don't have a copy of it.
Different, my comments would have been different then.
I have a question for Scott. Their 50-foot buffer requirement in certain industrial areas not gonna apply to this situation where it's gonna be industrial next to?
Well, again, so until it's merged with the other lot and a replat comes in, I don't wanna press a buffer on something that is, because they're gonna have to come back regardless.
Didn't we already impose the 50-foot buffer on his property as it was when it came through?
We did on that one, so there's gonna be, there'll be a new one. I'm thinking more along the lines of a 75-foot. That's what I've kind of discussed with them, on the back end.
We have discussed adding a buffer once we combine the
So
property.
the buffer will be on the commercial portion, not on the industrial portion?
Correct.
Which is not how it's set out in the code.
Right, but the one thing that I'm trying to do is you know, this is C2 encroaching into industrial, and my goal here is more, just as much to protect industrial as it is to protect the future C2, not knowing what's going in there. And I think it's imperative that we understand that we have a great industrial park that we need to protect, so I don't want.
I guess my concern is that can you enforce the buffer on the commercial as opposed to the industrial?
I would say that if one came before the other, you could enforce the buffer on the industrial, and it would be at a big disadvantage if we didn't have the buffer on the commercial going in first. If the commercial were to build out first, and then the industrial came along, yes, by ordinance or by code, you could enforce the buffer if we didn't have it in place. If we put it in place on the commercial, and it's more advantageous to the development of the property because of what we can do in that buffer, from the landscaping to the slopes, it provides a greater value to the commercial side by including that buffer land in the actual commercial development versus the industrial.
We're all going commercial here though, right?
No, in front what's facing Murphy would still be industrial.
Okay.
And that'll be on the next item with the rezoning and land uses. But yeah, the Harris Pfeiffer side would be the C2. So the Lot 1B, they have planned for C2, and then remaining industrial for 1A.
Okay, I misunderstood that from this exhibit. Okay. I just looked at it on this. Okay.
So we're being asked basically to grant variances from two different parts of the code, one in the subdivision and one the zoning, because somebody has a development deal. And isn't there also a state statute that you have to have frontage when you create new lots?
I don't believe there is a state statute to that effect, but
I
there are
couldn't
state
find
statutes.
one.
There are state statutes to the effect of giving a landlocked landowner a remedy to force a road through via the county court,
Okay, well, that's good.
which
Which would be the easement.
The 50-foot
could be,
access,
could be, does not have
the
to be.
50-foot access easement.
But couldn't you just somehow not go through a subdivision process and do a meets and bound on
So
one parcel and get it up there a little over 5 acres, so you could do that? And then you wouldn't have to have us voting against our own code?
But we're wanting to make a zoning change.
Right,
I think what she's saying, you've got 4.934
yeah.
acres. If you bump it up over 5.01 acres, technically, you could sell it and meet the intent of the code by meets and bounds without being a legal subdivision. That's.
And the next time I came to, it's less
that's
than
right.
10 acres
Yeah,
total,
you're
so I
right,
can't
yeah.
do that.
Thank
And
you.
even if I did, the next time I came before your planning department, I would have my hand slapped for having done so.
So section 70-41C1 says all divisions of platting of a tract or parcel of land into one or more lots, building sites, or other divisions for the purpose, whether immediate or future, of sale or building development shall be considered a subdivision subject to this chapter.
Do we allow a lot to have two zoning classifications on different parts of it? In the split zoning on one lot? I couldn't find it in the code, so I was hoping you.
I'm not aware of any.
Mr. Lyon, comment?
Yeah, I mean, on a lot, you could theoretically have split zoning. A large property's brought in, half the property is, let's say, industrial and half is commercial. So you could have that if it's a 40 acre property, 20 acre property. It's not unheard of, especially on early zonings, where part of a property is on one thing and part is another, and that's where you're getting into boundary lines and could be an old section line when it was brought in. So it's not ideal, but you could have two different zonings on a property, but it requires meets and bounds.
But that's why we're asking for the subdivision of the property. One would be zoned industrial, the other commercial.
And I apologize, I didn't hear the question. We do have lots in the city that have one lot split with zoning. You can look up Carnahan going towards the industrial park. There's PCD zoning on lots with industrial on the same one.
So, Mr. Chair, are we on item 5A just for the proposed preliminary plat?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, we got zoning and everything else next here. So we just call the question on the preliminary replat, again. This has, the preliminary plat's got nothing to do with the zoning, right? Correct.
I think the question is some issues with the buffers and with the, also with the access to a
That has to do with
road.
zoning.
Yeah. I think the big question is, can we do this preliminary plat?
Yeah, and Mike brought it up too. Does the rezoning need, I don't know.
Like the road access system.
Yeah.
Jason, did you die?
I think he says it's time to go home.
Any further discussion, or anybody have a motion?
I'll make a motion, we approve the proposed preliminary plat.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Those opposed, no?
No?
Vote 5-2, the motion does pass. Now move on to item number 6. We'll go with 6A, the amendment to master land use plan. Staff report, please.
Mr. Chair, this is 8.5 acres that their current zoning is I-1, proposed zoning is C2, and with that, the staff recommended the current use is industrial. Staff recommended a proposed commercial and industrial use. Staff initiated the land use amendment pursuant to section 54-78A for the proposed 8.5 acre property, which necessitated a proposed rezoning amendment from I-1 to C2 for approximately 5 acres of property. The guidelines for the decision have been provided to you. The requested rezoning of Lot 1B of the proposed Tri-Victus replat necessitates a land use amendment due to C2 not being allowed in industrial. The proposal to commercial industrial allows a dual use on the two proposed lots without needing future land use amendments as long as development of the proposed lots remain industrial or commercial in nature. Property adjacent and to the west of this property were recently downzoned from C3 to C2, along with the approved land alterations grading to support development activities on the approved site plan of the villages at Maumelle. These activities are changing the character of the area, making it more conducive for commercial development along Commercial Park Drive. This land use change would support the continued growth in this commercial area while maintaining the industrial zone along Murphy Drive. One other comment that I'll make is that the commercial industrial land use type was designed for the PCD. It was intended for the PCD, but Jason made the suggestion, I actually agreed with it this one time, I guess, maybe, no. That because the industrial and the commercial is zoning that they're seeking on the same lot, that would allow for commercial or industrial depending on if the C2 didn't go and they ended up wanted to stay industrial on the entire site. So we wouldn't have to come back for a land use change.
Thank you, Mr. Grover. Commissioner discussion? Does anyone have a motion?
Have a motion for a due pass recommendation to the city council for the proposed amendment to the master land use map.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no. Motion passes. We'll move on to the proposed amendment to the master zoning map. Staff report, please.
Okay, so this request is for rezoning 4.8 acres. Same location, Harrison Pfeiffer subdivision under development. The property was rezoned again last year to C2. I'll just, a summary of analysis was provided to you. Traffic considerations with the proposed replat and future merger of Lot 1B with Harrison Pfeiffer. This would shift roughly 50% of the property access and traffic patterns from Murphy Drive to Commercial Park Drive, potentially reducing heavier traffic impacts on industrial. And then other guidelines, staff analysis, the proposed rezoning fits the area as a transition buffer zone for the area. The proposed C2 will connect with existing C2 on Commercial Park Drive and allow development from the Commercial Park side due to current clearing along the ridge, which has leveled off the land, allowing potential development of this area. Staff recommends a due pass recommendation to Maumelle City Council for the proposed amendment to the master zoning map from I1 to C2.
Thank you, Mr. Grummer. Any discussion? Anyone have a motion?
I'll make a motion for a due pass recommendation to the city council for the proposed amendment to the master zoning map.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no. Motion passes. I will now close the public hearing. We'll move on to liaison reports, the meeting of July 5th. Commissioner Landis.
Yes, there is no planning commission items on the agenda.
Lucky you. For July 18th, Vice Chair Smith is not here, so we'll refer to the minutes and the video that are on the city website. Assignments for next month, August 1st, Commissioner Fisher, and August 15th, Commissioner Winnick. Does anyone have?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. Those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed, no. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Get leg falling asleep on your
Trying
back.
to stand up. Yeah. Trying to stand up.